to our APRU webinar today. Today, we're going to talk about assessment, which we have been thinking a lot since the beginning of teacher and learning, especially in the past few years when our teaching transferred to the online mode. So we're very glad to have everybody here. Today, we have 3 speakers. Original, we have 4, but one, Maria, is working on our defense for the PhD degree. We wish her the best luck. Before we start, we invite our speakers to share their experience or their expertise. Please allow me to introduce Melissa Withers, a professor from the University of Southern California and also the APRU Global Health Program Director. Okay, so Melissa, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kate, and welcome to this webinar. I'm really delighted to see you all here and really looking forward to these talks from our experts from around the world. I just wanted to mention, in case you haven't heard, the APRU stands for Association of Pacific Rim Universities, and it's a nonprofit network of 60 leading universities in the Asia Pacific. And the association was started more than 25 years ago by 4 university presidents from California. And so over the years, the Global Health Program, which has been in existence now for about 10 years, has really talked about leveraging the expertise within our network, not just for global health research, but also for education. And that's something that we've really accelerated during the pandemic and have offered a number of webinars and trainings. And so this is a topic that has come up as something of real interest. And as I said, we have a lot of expertise within our network. So that's the impetus of this webinar, which is put on by our working group on global health education and technology, which is led by Catherine Cho at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. But it doesn't really matter if you're in global health or not. I think you can really take some of these tips and practices away in your own work. So I'm really delighted again for all of you to be here. And I would like to thank Kate for her leadership and also for our speakers for taking the time to speak to us. So I would like to begin. So we have, although we lost 1 speaker, we have 4 speakers. We have Ben Wiggins from the University of Washington, who's going to kick us off with his talk. So Ben Wiggins it has taught and supported biology and education at the University of Washington for 15 years. He teaches courses as small as a handful of graduate trainees and teaching methods, and as large as an 800-person, oh my gosh, introductory biology course. His NSF-funded research focuses on active learning, assessment strategies that align well with active teaching, and training instructors to take those techniques often into their very large classrooms. And he is really an expert in, especially an expert in one assessment method that I've heard about, but I can't wait to hear more. So Ben, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Right on, thank you. This is great. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about some of the research and some of the work that we've been doing in our classes. I'm going to try to share my slides here, and I'm hoping to see nods that you can see them. All right. Great. So public exams are a type of exams that we've been working on for going on more than a decade now. And I want to introduce you very briefly to the research team and why we care about exams. Not that they're the only way that you should think about assessment, but and then some of the research that's gone into the public exam system and our research into the outcomes for students. After I tell you why it's really good, then I'm going to tell you what it actually is. So hopefully I will have hooked your interest. So our research team is broadly spread out between a few community colleges, Arizona State, University of Washington, so Shoreline Community College and Edmonds Community College, and we're all working to think about large STEM courses especially. So these are some of the courses that I've taught, and our research projects are largely funded by the National Science Foundation in things like active learning for different kinds of science. For this project I'm going to tell you about, we're actually funded by a for-profit institution called Course Hero, who you may have heard of. You have probably heard of them because they sometimes do make problems for instructors. They are trying to do some good as well, so that's why they're funding us. But it's a totally independent project. So why do we care about college exams? Well, in our exams, and this is half of our classroom, you can't see the top balcony with 300 more students. In exams, we have struggled historically in our university and colleges with a few things. And one of the biggest is that students feel tricked by the exam. They might have the knowledge, but they didn't know how to answer. They felt like it was tricky. Students are confused by too much information. They sit down in an exam and are hit by a wall of information, and it's just too much, even if they know the science. Our third problem is that because of the logistical constraints of time and format, most of our questions are pretty low level. So memorization kinds of fact-based questions when we'd like them to do more interesting science. And lastly, because of these three, students don't trust us as much as they could. This feels like an adversarial relationship where we're trying to take away their points instead of all of us trying to learn science together. And we want to develop a style of exam that we think will treat these problems. So we want to help students overcome language barriers, especially for our students who can think in multiple languages. We want to do justice to that instead of making it a detriment. We want to direct students to the core concepts. So not just a wall of equal information, but what's the most important piece of a class? We'd like to inspire deeper thinking. Instead of what is this name, how can you use this? Or how can you hypothesize? Or what does this data mean? And then we think if we do those things, that we'll be able to authentically include students in the process of the exam. This isn't an adversarial relationship. This is something they understand and they feel part of. If you are interested in the literature backing of any of these problems or solutions, I'll leave these links as live in the slides and happy to give them to you afterwards. But there's some interesting reading from outside of college science teaching. These are what we're shooting for. And we designed a system of exams that we think treats these four problems. So it is an evidence-based method. What I'm going to tell you about next is some research to show that it's not just an evidence-based method, but an evidence-validated method. So these are some of the benefits that we're looking for. We care about equity, we care about student achievement, and we care about our methods being movable between institutions. It's not just a University of Washington thing. But, and this is a big one for us, we can't throw a method out there and ask college professors to teach something that takes twice as much time, something that takes a lot of new technology, something that takes a massive amount of training. So we've designed this particular intervention called public exams to be doable by any faculty. And in the trainings that we've done with faculty at a bunch of other institutions, most of the time in about 15 minutes, people will respond to what we're doing by saying, oh, that's it? Oh, that's pretty easy. And I am happy to talk you through some of how you do it, but you don't need to know much more than it would take 20 minutes to learn, and an hour workshop is plenty. If you're okay with me there, that we want to make this sustainable for faculty, then I want to move into some of the research that we've done. So our research flow was this. We need better exam outcomes. So we start looking in the literature for better ways to do assessment. We start asking people who do great assessments, how do these practitioners do their work? And we look for funding, as we are all, I'm sure, looking for funding. So taking those together, we tried to design using the best practices. And this brings us to the question of, does it actually work? So we have to figure out what's going on. And to learn more about the impact of this method on students, well, we needed funding for that. And then we start asking qualitative interviews. Let's bring students in and hear deeply what they think. And those qualitative interviews we use in rigorous qualitative methods to do quantitative surveying. So if we figure out what the questions are, then we can ask those questions to many, many students. We also use those interviews to think, what are the open-ended questions that we can get from students, and open-ended data from students, instead of just which one of these choices do you like, they can tell us what they really feel in a large scale. And then that large scale answer set, we can take and do coding and quantification. So we're trying to get to something that is observable, something that's sustainable out of this qualitative research method. And so this kind of design-based research has a long history in education, less so in college science teaching. Lastly, there is some direct quantitative analysis of student outcomes. We may touch on that here, although it's mostly to validate the fact that we're not seeing the kind of pernicious racial or ethnic gaps that we sometimes see with different interventions. Okay, that's how we go about our research. Here's the actual research that we did. So we asked students, among lots of other things that we asked, the final core question that we asked many, many students going through these exams: did the style of exams in this course work for you? Why or why not? It's a very simple, broad question for which students will bring all kinds of answers. And we have huge spreadsheets of their answers, which we then need to code. And I apologize if you don't like coding, but I'm going to give you the very brief answer on how we did this. So our coders were blinded to the course and to the exam type. So we have students in normal exams, we have students in public exams, in large and diverse classrooms. And then the codes were iteratively developed. So we coded, we talked about it in the research team, we recoded to find the best fit for the data. And we coded every response for being positive or negative. And what that means is that of the different things that we were looking for, so does this affect language barriers? Does this help students with core concepts or confuse them? Does this lead to deeper thought or less deep thought? On each of these 6 codes, we coded them for positive or negative. So if a student said, I felt like I had some say in my own exam, we would code that as being part of authentic involvement. Students feel part of the exam, and not based on whether students liked it or not, but based on whether this is likely to lead to a good educational outcome. From there, we'd say this is part of authentic involvement and it's a positive thing that we're seeing with students. Some other examples here. A student might say, the public exam made it harder to know what I needed to know. Well, that's coded in directing to core concepts, and that's a bad thing. We don't want students to be confused about what they need to know. You can probably imagine students might hate this style, and a student could say, I hate public exams because they make me think more deeply. That's a positive, right? It's definitely involved in their deeper thought, but it's positive because we're getting an outcome that we want from students. And similarly, you might see something like, the internet connection at our home made these exams really frustrating. That has nothing to do with the public exam system. So it's a bad thing, unrelated to the exam. Now, the reason those unrelated questions and comments are important is because that's our control group. So we found that we see about a 2-to-1 ratio of positive to negative responses in this way of doing research, and that's controlled by that group. So we can compare the things that are about the public exam to this control group. That was the 1-minute version. I appreciate you sticking with me, even if you're not a qualitative research nerd. But here's the actual outcomes. So when we compare the overall impacts of public exams, again, using student comments, but not what they like, but what's good or bad for their learning, we find that the overall impact of public exams is significantly positive for students and a pretty strong p-value, especially for educational data. Did it help with language barriers? No, we didn't see an impact there. We didn't see an impact with authentic involvement. That doesn't mean it doesn't help. We just can't see it in our data if it does. Did it help with collaboration? We don't have enough data there, but where it did help is that it seemed to significantly help students find the core concepts. They were better directed, even though they might have study guides and study materials and course questions. Public exam helped them find the core concepts, and it helped them think more deeply. So those are two big positives coming out of this. Lastly, and we weren't looking for this at the beginning, but so many students talked about it in interviews that we put it into the docket. We found that this significantly reduced student test anxiety. In the United States, we think that our students right now are the most anxious that college students have ever been in our country. So this is a big deal for us. Lastly, we did not see any difference between racial, ethnic, gender, or financial backing groups. So students who are different among these demographic lines are not answering these questions differently as far as we can tell. That means our summary is that we think students are studying more efficiently because they know the core concepts, they're thinking more deeply, and they're doing their testing with less anxiety. If you believe in those positives, then you might want to know what we're actually doing on the exams. And here's an example to show you that. So here's a public exam question. You know what? Actually, I'll start with a traditional question. This is taken from a military history course. I don't know how many naval military historians are in this group, but probably this is pretty far for all of us. And this is the kind of exam question that a student would read in their exam. So there's some reading at the beginning, there's a multiple choice question, and there's a written question down at the bottom there, question 2. There's nothing wrong with this assessment. It does lead students to talk about the right things. But I want to show you what a public exam version of the same question would be. So here's the public version. This is presented to students a week ahead of the exam. So they have the same framing, but they also have more complicated data for analysis. We're not just asking them to repeat things, but really analyze this data. Tell us where the ships are moving, how this affected the battle between these two fleets. Then students have some of this data withheld. So we did not give them every last word. They know enough to analyze, they know enough to study, they know enough to work creatively, but we hold back 1 or 2 words in the withheld brackets. So that students have to study in lots of different ways, and they have to invent questions and think creatively. And then for question number 4, this is the actual question text. For questions that we think we want students to really look forward and prepare their answers, this is exactly what they would need to write. Then on the exam, a week later, when they walk into the room, the only difference is that we give them those few words. That seems like a small difference, but that difference means that students can spend a lot of time studying into the real exam. They know that this kind of analysis is exactly what we want. And so they're not searching for different kinds of answers. They're not guessing. They're not as anxious about what they're going to see in the exam itself. If you would like a second example here from an art history course. So there's some framing up top of what students should do, and there are 2 images. So here they're supposed to use dashed lines to indicate certain things that they know using their art history background. And what we found is that on the final exam, when we give them both of those pictures, then some parts of the answer are knowable before the exam, but they have to generate their own study examples. So they think more creatively in their studying, especially social studying, using other students as resources. And then because we have students looking at exam material up to a week ahead of time, they reflect back to us problems with the exam. I am not a perfect exam writer by any means. One of the things students told us is that this phrase, using dashed lines to indicate locations, was extremely confusing. So we replaced that with a different line, and then instead of having 50 questions during the exam, we didn't have any, because this made sense in the student's own language. Okay, I'm coming right up to the end here, but the structure of a public exam is probably now, you could guess what I'm going to show you. A normal exam, you might have some time before the exam. Some things students can see and some things are secret. So the exam is at the end of this process. And mostly you write everything in secret while students study in parallel and they do their best on this secret document. A public exam, we write the partial version and give that to students so students can see it beforehand. That's all out in the open. If a student walks into my office, I don't have to hide anything, which you can imagine it would engender some trust. Students edit and tell us what's wrong with it. We use those student edits and we build a new version to send back out to them. And then we just give them the final piece of the exam when they walk in. So students can be studying beforehand. They can help us with the language barriers. They can really think creatively and know what the core concepts are. We can do deeper work. And lastly, so much of this is out in the open that they probably trust us more at the end of it. Okay, coming right up to the end of my time. I just want to say that I think public exams are starting to show some meaningful benefits for students. Those are generally in regards to deeper thought and better understanding of the core concepts with less anxiety. And this is a method that anyone can do. Those examples were as complicated as it can possibly get. We have tons of questions still to investigate and a huge list of people to thank. I really appreciate everybody listening to this. And if I haven't taken too much time, I'd love to take any questions.
Thank you, Ben. So when I was reading the PowerPoint, it's pretty interesting because involving students in the assessment strategy, the process, we have been talking about that in the past few years, but it's kind of like it hasn't worked for everybody yet. But we're glad to hear your sharing. We have a question in the chat box. Greg asked, what was the total population of sample size in your research project?
Yeah, something 447.
Okay, thank you. Ben shared the slides in the chat box. Okay.
Yeah, now it's going out to everyone.
Okay. So Natia, as you want to promote collaboration between the instructor and the students, or among the students, they can talk to each other, so they just have this discussion along the way.
Yes, absolutely. We do everything we can to get students working together before the exam. And by giving them an exam that they can really work with and dig their teeth into, we think we're making even more headway into getting social studying. The actual exam itself is solitary, but before that, there's tons of work going on.
Thank you very much. A question from Lillian. She asks, from your experience, what are some of the things that students usually added in the exam?
Yeah, great question. This is almost entirely language that is not field-specific jargon. So the field-specific jargon, they understand they have to study it and they get some time to read some of it. But when I write a statement like, tell me the root of the molecule of this membrane of, and I throw the word of in 6 times in the same sentence, 20 students will tell me that sentence doesn't make sense. Okay, so we need to back it up, simplify the clause structure, and it's much smoother for everyone. Students from other language backgrounds or students who are first generation to go to college may benefit the most, but probably all students are benefiting from my editing English, and my editors are extremely motivated. So they're really helpful. It's almost always common language usage.
So is there any, are there any students who ask for like something like they do something to reduce the difficulty of the question?
So we usually do 3 or 4 exams in a quarter, and our quarters are 10 weeks. In the first exam, before they've tried it, students will say things like, well, I think this question is going to be too hard. After they've done it one time, they realize that everybody gets the same questions. And if they're motivated and they study beforehand, they have an advantage. So they actually start pushing for harder questions. The thing they're worried about is that the final question is going to be too easy. When I have 400 students in a room saying they want harder questions, I feel like I'm doing my job and that we're going to get some really good scientists out of it. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really fantastic, Ben. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about public exams. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If anyone has questions about public exams at any time, I'd love to talk about it.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on. So I am happy to introduce our next two speakers who will be talking about a perspective tool. And first, I would like to introduce Lillian Chai Min Yen, who comes from Nanyang Technological University. Lillian is a lecturer with the Interdisciplinary Collaborative Core Office under the Institute for Pedagogical Innovation, Research and Excellence, also known as ASPIRE at NTU. And she's a teaching member of the ICC module on healthy living and well-being, and received her PhD in exercise science from the University of Queensland. And then our second speaker talking about this same topic is, let's see, sorry about that. Let me bring her bio up. Is Ethel Hu, who currently holds an appointment as an education specialist and lecturer with the same ICC under Inspire at NTU, where she's also a teaching team member of the institution-wide Healthy Living and Wellbeing module. And she's been a strategic member involved in exploring and utilizing education technology to enhance group work and peer evaluation among students. You could read all of our speakers' full bios on our website, but I'm happy to introduce Lillian and Ethel to speak to us.
Hi, everybody. Everybody can hear me all right, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa, for the introduction. So my colleague Lillian and I will be actually introducing to you guys this tool to actually assess student peer evaluation known as Peerceptive. Basically a tool that helps students to actually rate or grade each other's essay and group performance. This is the overview. So we'll run through a little bit of the theoretical underpinnings of peer evaluation, followed by the technical side of the tool itself. So if you're interested, and also the execution considerations. So innovation needs to be incorporated in how we craft the rubric, etc., etc. So we'll go through that in today's session. So what exactly is peer evaluation? It's basically an assessment tool, and usually it's paired up with another assignment itself. It's not technically an independent assessment on itself. We could actually use the peer evaluation tool to get students to rate each other and comment and give qualitative comments. So there's the quantitative aspect as well as the qualitative comments for students to actually know how they perform on their group project. And the whole key idea is for each other to collaborate. The whole spirit of the peer evaluation is to actually encourage shared responsibility for group work. And we need to distinguish between the term peer evaluation and peer assessment. Peer evaluation is what we are going to focus on today for today's presentation. Basically, it's about getting students to actually rate each other with regards to their contribution and performance in the group work. And peer assessment is more of the essay grading, where the tool also allows students to actually note their essays and get their peers to actually grade the essay. But we'll be going through more of this part today. So the peer evaluation, the whole spirit of it, there's pros and cons in actually incorporating it as part of the group project assessment. The whole idea is to get students to actually have ownership over their learning as well as the group project work, and to minimize free riding and to foster collaboration and teamwork. the whole idea, depending on how we craft the rubric. So our rubric actually has a component where, you know, we want students to learn how to actually collaborate and support each other. So if we have that component in the rubric itself, it will actually enhance group work and the whole supportive environment within teamwork itself. However, the cons is as such that if the peer evaluation is not run well, it actually can create group tension if everybody rate each other down. And there's also concern over reliability and validity of the peers rating. Like, can we actually trust the students to actually rate each other very objectively, or can bullying actually happen and stuff like that? So it's actually also very complex because of the different permutations, like 5-person rate, another 4-person, 5-person kind of thing in a group of 6. And the max behind it, if you don't have a tool like Peerceptive, it can actually get very complicated in terms of collection of data and assessing the average score. So I'll leave my colleague Lillian to actually talk more about to enhance the pros and reduce the cons. It actually depends a lot on how we execute the peer evaluation. For us, there are many different ways of running the peer evaluation. For our team in the healthy living and well-being, we actually incorporated the behavioral theory, a learning theory, to help us sort of scope out how we want the peer evaluation to be like. So behavioral theory by B.F. Skinner basically talked about using rewards and punishment in shaping people's behavior. So far we have actually used 2 types. Positive reinforcement. We actually started with the negative punishment type, where the peer evaluation rating, right? If they drop below a certain score, then we deduct marks for the group project. And last semester, we actually used the positive reinforcement part, where the peer evaluation rating will form 10% of their overall assessment grade. But this semester, we are reverting back to the negative punishment, that if they drop it below a certain grade, then we dock their project marks. So which one we use, different groups of students will be happy or unhappy. So in this particular version, those who really work very hard, and then those will not be very happy, because those people who don't work so hard will still get some points. But for this, students whose marks get docked, they won't be too happy. Yeah, so it depends at the end of the day what kind actually motivates students to work harder. And the whole entire team, the whole entire center actually decided to revert back to this one, where we dock marks, so that, you know, out of fear, students will actually be motivated to work more. Yeah, all right. I mean, positive punishment is that kind where you actually incorporate some additional homework if they actually don't get the rating up, you know. And perhaps negative reinforcement is removing the peer evaluation altogether, maybe just the negative, the feedback for learning. So Peerceptive, how it looks like, I'll just go through a little bit of the technical aspect because this is not a technical run through. The tool itself currently is still a bit buggy because they actually had a new interface, but I have to say that it's generally very helpful. The peer evaluation tool allows students to actually evaluate the whole entire group as a whole, or even just the group leader, or even the instructors ourselves, okay? But the main thing that we need is usually whether we want students to rate themselves, which is the self-evaluation. Over here, we don't get students to do self-evaluation, but that would be helpful. But for our team, we use the overall peer evaluation from each member as an average grade to see their performance in the group itself. This is how the rubric, where we plonk into the system, how it will look like. Over here is just the name of the criteria of the rubric. It allows you to have as many descriptors as you want. For us, as of now, we can go. We have it up to 9 descriptors. And the beautiful part about the new interface is that it allows you to actually have different weightages for different criteria. Yeah, so like 15% for one component in the rubric, another 25%. So that can be weighted. And that's helpful because some components we want to actually emphasize a little bit more, like for example, a supportive environment, then we can give it a greater weightage. And we have learned from experience that students tend not to react very well if they actually get back their peer evaluation rating itself. Like for example, if it's out of a score of 10, right? In our first semester, we actually released the first half to them. It was sort of by accident. We didn't quite want to release it to them, but in the end, when they saw the rating, right, when it's not perfect, the students reacted and they go like, oh, must I be concerned? Will I be rated down? Will it affect my score? So we have learned from experience that we should not release the ratings. So but our first half of the peer evaluation is totally formative, just for learning, where we release the comments. So in the new system, we can actually hide the ratings and just show the comments. And even showing the comments, if students are not careful and they are harsh, it can also affect group dynamics. And this is how the results actually look like at the end of the day, where you can tell how many have completed. And this is the overall rating score itself, broken down by the different components. And this is the detailed version where you can actually look at, like, for each student, how this person rated this student. Yeah, and the comments will also be here. The rating and comments will be here. I'll pass my time over to my colleague Lilian now to run through the students' perspective, how it looks like.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So the next few slides, you will be actually seeing what the students will be seeing after we launch the Peerceptive on the Blackboard itself. And when the students actually click in, we'll give them a link to how to go into this Peerceptive in their learning board. So when they click in, they will actually see it's actually quite intuitive in the new system itself. So straight away that you can just look at on the right-hand side is the evaluation button. So you just click on that. And when you click on that, you actually will be seeing their group members inside there. So Aether has been like doing all the hard work behind to set out the different groups, because we have about 2,500 students each semester. And we are running Peerceptive for twice per semester. So in the middle of the semester, we launch one, which is with the formative feedback. And at the end of semester, they will get a summative feedback. So the groupings are actually very important. So the background setting up is actually quite tedious, but with the new system they are launching, actually make things a little bit easier. So when they actually see this Peerceptive, when they click into it, they will show different, if they have a group of 5 members, so they're going to evaluate the other 4 members. You will see 4 students over there. And when they click on each name, the rubrics were actually shown there. So like what Aether had shared, we have the rubrics of 9 categories arranged from 1 to 9. 1 as the lowest, 9 is the highest. And each of the category, they have, we give them a different weightage. For example, the slides that you're seeing here, fulfilling one's responsibility duty is 15%. So others, we are actually rated a little bit more as well as it goes through. Okay. So we also encourage students to give like constructive feedbacks to their peers so that they are actually able to learn. That's why when we launched 2 Peerceptive, okay, the first one will be more formative. They still rate their peers, but however, they do not get the ratings at the middle of the semester. They only get the formative feedback. So that, because it's always the first time they work together as a group. So we want to give a chance to people to improve along the way for their second project at the end of the semester. We encourage students to give constructive and really fair comments so that people have a chance to improve on the second project. So we also reminded students to be kind, to be constructive as well. So now going through some of the execution consideration, what should we be considering if we wanted to actually launch a Peerceptive, this kind of peer evaluation for students? So our schedule are actually pretty tight over the semester. So we typically give students about 2 weeks to complete the peer evaluation. Most of the time, we give them the option, okay, to whether to do it privately or do it in class. Okay, of course, there's pros and cons between these two. Privately, they can actually give much sincere comments. If in class, kind of like this third party effect will actually affect the ratings because you are sitting around in a group. If their group dynamic is good, then shouldn't be a problem. If there's some group tension, that could be quite tricky in a way. However, some of the students are actually pretty busy. So that's why we actually give them these two options. When we have time in the tutorial class, we will just remind them to complete. Because this semester, if they do not complete any peer evaluation, there will be a penalty applied to them as well. So we just have to remind them to give their peer evaluation properly in the end of the semester. So whether to release or not to release the score or the comments, it's also pros and cons as well. If you release it, sometimes it will trigger the kind of performance anxiety. And sometimes if the feedbacks are not very good, it will affect the group dynamic as well. But however, if you do not release those comments, those free rider, you kind of like will not learn, and it will actually affect the whole group dynamics and whole group performance as well. Yeah. So this is something to consider. So that's why we actually carve out with 4 different categories of the rubric, just to try to improve those collaborative spirit, and hopefully to improve the quality of work that is submitted by the students as well. Okay, so with that, and then we're actually, for peer assessment, which is what we're not touching on that, it will be more on the timeliness of the submission, because they need to submit some of the assessment for peer assessment in other courses that they're actually doing. For scores, like we say, because we have a 13-week semester, on week 6, okay, we will actually show this peer evaluation that is mainly focusing on formative comments. And in week 12, we will launch another peer evaluation, and that is where the scores and the comments will be taken into consideration. However, these are not being released to the students because this rating will affect their overall performance for the whole course itself. Yeah. So the students are being notified that if they don't score above certain grades, there will be penalty that is being applied. That will be the negative punishment that we actually mentioned earlier. Okay, so we actually emphasize on anonymity so that student is not stressed, okay, about who actually giving what comment, and do you want to affect any of the interpersonal relationship as well within the student. So we actually stress on that a lot. We didn't actually really do self-evaluation because a lot of time it tends to inflate the grades. Yeah, so and actually lack of validity. Usually students like to grade themselves higher. So we did not consider that at this point of time. And lastly is tutor's moderation, because we have a class of like 6 at each time, 6 group at each time. So tutor has the chances to mingle around and monitor the group dynamics in the class. So sometimes if there's any group tension that is being brought up to tutor's attention, probably we have to do this as a moderation, using the peer evaluation as a moderation, take into consideration what's really going on in the group itself. Yeah. So I think that's all from us, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And I know we have some questions. Kate, did you want to manage, or should I?
Or should we address the questions in the Q&A session?
Oh, okay, sure. So let me introduce our final speaker for today. It's my pleasure to welcome Lillian Look, who used to be at the University of Hong Kong, but is now at the University College London. Lillian is a research fellow at the Center for Engineering Education. And before that, she was postdoctoral fellow in the Center for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning at the University of Hong Kong. She has a PhD in education, a master's in linguistics from Monash, and a bachelor's in psychology from the National University of Singapore. So welcome, Lillian. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, thank you. Okay. Good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Lillian. Yep, as what Melissa said, I just moved to London not long ago. I just started my job in September. So this explains my multiple affiliations listed here. So please excuse my voice because I'm still recovering from a cold, but it's lucky that my voice came back yesterday. The title of my presentation is Opportunities for Transformation in Assessment Practice During the Pandemic, but are we ready to be innovative? Due to restricted access to the campus during the pandemic, many universities around the world have to change their assessment practice to adapt to the situation. And this has led us to consider the use of different types of innovative assessment, which I see as alternatives to traditional forms of assessment like the in-class examination. And here are just some examples of innovative assessment, like infographic, open book exam, poster presentations, and blogs. And of course, student as partner version of the public exam shared by Ben is definitely also one of them. The aim of my presentation today is to help us reflect on whether we are assessment literate. To put it simply, whether we are capable of assessing student learning through the use of different types of innovative or alternative assessment. Whether we are able to leverage the potential of these assessment methods in assessing and supporting student learning. Now, I believe that by now, especially after the sharing by the previous speakers, we are pretty much convinced about the benefits of innovative assessment. This assessment allows students to apply their knowledge to solve real-life problems. They are more interesting and engaging for students. And another beauty of innovative assessment is that they allow us to assess students' development of higher order thinking skills and holistic competencies on top of academic knowledge. I'm using the term holistic competencies to refer to different generic skills or soft skills. So I will be using these terms interchangeably. These competencies include skills such as communication skills, problem-solving skills, creativity, as well as positive values and attitudes such as resilience and self-confidence. But this is actually an image with different skills listed in the form of a crossword, which I designed for a mask. So we were using this to help promote the different types of skills to both students and teachers when I was in Hong Kong. Just a quick mention, I've included this QR code in some of the slides throughout my presentation, just in case you would like to have a look at the related article. So now I would like to invite you to share with me, do you assess students on their holistic competencies in your course? So go to www.menti.com, use the code 61441268. And submit your answer. Oh, great, I see one answer here. Okay, so we have more people telling me that not now, but I want to do so in the future. Okay, so, okay. Okay, so we have more that not now, okay. Let me move on to the next slide, which brings us to the next question. So for those of you who assess holistic competencies or are interested to do so in the future, can you share with us which competency are you assessing, or which competency do you want to assess in the future?
I don't know if it's me or I can't,
Is this working?
no, it says, please wait for the presenter to show the next slide for me. I don't know if other people have something different.
Let me check. Is it working now?
That works, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, no, yeah, now it says, do you assess students' holistic competencies? So back to the first question.
Oh, it actually went back to the first question. Oh, no.
Yeah, it's just on the first question. I don't know if we should ask.
Okay, no worries. Why not? You just type it, your answer in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, critical thinking we have. Communication skills, teamwork skills. Thank you for participating. Yeah. Now that we have some competencies in mind, so I would like to draw upon a framework to help us reflect on our assessment practice, to help us think about, it's actually working now. Okay, no worries. Okay, so now that we have some competencies in mind, I would like to draw upon a framework to help us think and reflect on our assessment practice, to help us think about whether we are ready to assess and whether we are able to assess these competencies through innovative assessment. And this framework is called the Teacher Assessment Literacy in Holistic Competency Framework, developed by me and my co-author. Just a little bit of history, just a little bit. Teacher assessment literacy has been around for quite some time. However, it is mainly based on the assessment of academic knowledge. So students in 1991 talked about knowledge, what to assess, why assess, and how to assess. And then Brockhart added in the practice part of it, talking about the ability to define learning outcomes, align them with the corresponding assessment method and criteria, the ability to select assessment tool, and the ability to provide feedback. And more recently, a few years ago, attitude in terms of teachers' belief about assessment was added by Xu and Brown. And in the last 2 years, Pesto and Andrade talked about the social emotional dimension, referring to teachers' ability to manage ethical issues and emotional reactions of students from assessment. Not all these 4 dimensions are important to form teachers' assessment literacy. And for me, I have developed this 4-dimensional framework with my co-author based on a study where we interviewed 24 academics from 5 universities in Hong Kong across different disciplines. And we adapted the previous framework presented earlier to the context of generic skills. So we have 4 areas, and some of them are similar to the framework for academic knowledge. So I'm only going to highlight those which are different. So here are the 4 areas which we need to be competent in order to assess students' soft skills, in order to maximize the potential of different assessment methods in assessing and supporting students' development of these competencies. The first dimension is knowledge. Now, do we have a clear understanding of the different generic skills? Do we know different assessment methods, and their pros and cons? I mean, to be assessment literate in generic skills doesn't mean that we need to be generic skills experts, ourselves, but rather we need to have clear enough understanding to tell students our expectations and to decide on the relevant and practical assessment method to suit your own context. For example, Lillian from NTU just shared with us how an online tool can communicate to students what it means by teamwork when students do their peer evaluation. The attitude dimension is quite straightforward. We need to be open-minded. We need to be open-minded, but at the same time, we also need to be critical in deciding on which skill to assess and to think critically about whether to assess or not. For example, one of the teachers we interviewed was concerned about whether the assessment of soft skills will give students pressure to develop these skills. He would rather his students be able to realize the importance of these skills and be intrinsically motivated to develop them. In terms of practice, innovative assessment needs to be designed with generic skills development in mind. So we need to engage students in self-reflection and self-assessment so that they can discover their own strengths and weaknesses, because basically they need to be aware of their weaknesses before they will make any plans to improve. Last but not least, the social cultural emotional dimension is about ethics and fairness in assessment. We need to be able to embrace subjective judgment. And what I mean here is that we need to accept that a student excellent in, for example, creativity in the eyes of one teacher may not necessarily be excellent in the eyes of another. Also, we need to take what I would call a person-oriented approach to assessment. And what I mean here is that it is important to be able to manage teacher-student relationship in a way that students will feel comfortable to talk, to discuss, or even to critique on the assessment methods and standards used. To be assessment literate, we need to be open to different interpretations of generic skills. For example, one of the teachers we talked to find it really hard to assess students' critical thinking in essays. And he has students who disagree with his assessment criteria. But after some time, he learned to discuss the definition of critical thinking and his assessment criteria with his students. So this story also tells us that developing assessment literacy is a journey. Overall, I believe that this framework will be very useful, but of course, there are a lot of research that can be done on each dimension, especially in different disciplines and also maybe on specific soft skill. So to end my presentation, where we design assessment, here are some of the things that I think we can reflect on. First, we can think about whether we are able to tell students our expectations on the learning outcomes assessed. Do we have the courage to step out from our comfort zone? Are we assessing with student development in mind, or are we assessing for the sake of assessing? Can we embrace subjectivity in assessment? And are we able to build trust with our students? This is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and we are going to start our Q&A session now. If you have any questions for our speakers, feel free. And also, if you have any general questions that you would like to discuss with any colleague here, we can have some free conversation, discussion on these assessment topics. So let me start with Ben's question. Ben has a question for Lillian and Ethel from NTU. He said, this is very interesting, and it seems like to be very motivating regarding their peer evaluation assessment practices. Have you heard any feedback about how students view group work in this course compared to other courses, where group work is not critique in this way?
Okay. So in NTU, peer evaluation is like a compulsory component institutionally. I I taught another institution before where peer evaluation is not like a main component. So I'm actually thinking that peer evaluation itself incorporated into the in NTU itself, right? What I know is that in other courses where like students stick throughout the entire 4 years, like if peer evaluation is used within the major itself versus our course where it's people come from all walks of life, they just take that one course and then after that they disappear. There are differences. So those where they will see each other throughout 4 years and like same class, same major, they tend to be kinder in their rating. But for our side, because they only see the, each other once, I think they can get a little bit more real in terms of their rating and more honest in their rating of each other, because they know that after that they won't see each other again. Yeah, so that's the difference. But in terms of motivation in group work, back then when in another institution when I was teaching, I personally didn't see that there's actually any difference in terms of like students' behavior in terms of whether they do it or not. So I think one of the key variable here could be that, you know, it really depends on how much students themselves take ownership over their ultimate grades at the end of the day. Yeah. So that's
Thank
my long and short of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ethel. Next question, I think is also from NTU, but I bet it can be extended to all of us. And if you have any comments, please feel free to turn on your microphone. So the next question is from Lee. I tried peer evaluation in my course, 10% out of the total too. However, all the students conspired to give maximum marks to everybody. Any views or suggestions to address this? And Bettina also addressed the same issue here. I bet a lot of instructors have this challenge. So Ethel, do you have any comment on this?
Yeah. My experience with peer evaluation is as such where generally people who tend to rate higher, those groups are really generally quite intact. Over our end, groups where the dynamics is really not so great, they get very honest with the way they rate each other. So those groups where they collaborate and say that let's rate each other like highest, right? The team dynamics could be quite varied. This is what I suspect. And I think one way to work around it could be that, you know, to give them the private space to do it on their own. Like, I mean, in a group, they might say that, hey, you know, let's rate each other high. Maybe there's one person who might want to rate that person lower. There are two ways to work around it. Number one, don't release the scores. Number two, allow students to do it privately and allow them to, even if you allow them to do it in class, let them know that they can edit it right until the end when the assignment closes, so they can still have the time to do it on their own. But I feel that the key here is really whether we release the ratings or not. I personally feel that our experiences and it has been a lot better when we don't release the grades. That's when students will be very honest with rating each other, because I mean, if they know, it's just like our teaching feedback too, right? Students won't be honest if they know that we will know who is rating who, or that, you know, it will be released. Yeah, so the anonymity, whether releasing the results or not, is a very key variable here. It's my opinion.
Yeah, I encountered a situation that some students gave their group members all the highest marks, and it seems like everybody was happy, but actually they were just being nice in their own way. But sometimes just some students can be really harsh. I had a group with 5 students, and these 5 students got separated into 2 groups based on their cultural background. And one group gave the other group really low marks, and somehow without any justification. So what I'm thinking here is whether students should be trained regarding how to give peer evaluation at the beginning of the course. Might invite Lillian Luke from UCL because you talk about the generic skills in terms of assessment. So do you think we should train students in terms of something like this at the beginning of the course, and also train them how to do teamwork, how to communicate with each other, prepare them for this course, at least course-long journey, and somehow be professional regarding peer evaluation?
Yes, for peer evaluation, definitely. I definitely agree that we should train students on how to do peer evaluation before moving on to do it, formally. Yeah, because I think some students, especially when they enter the university, they are not familiar with peer evaluation at all. They have never done it in their secondary school. Yeah. So I think it's definitely needed.
I have a follow-up question. Now, if we talk about generic skills in assessment or in peer evaluation, I'm not saying putting a percentage on that, but I'm just thinking we do peer evaluation for a course and we ask students to assess each other's performance regarding the course content, the knowledge, the skills they're learning related to this course. But do you think, I don't know how to say that, peer evaluation, do you think we should put 50% of marks on the knowledge related to the course, another 50 on the generic skills that they're using in the course? Is it 50-50 thing, or one has more weight on it? I'm not quite sure. I know practically we cannot put such a percentage, but I'm just thinking how much generic skills, how much weight it has.
I think this brings us back to the question of what is included in the intended learning outcome of your course. What do you want to achieve in your course? Because there are so many different generic skills. I'm sure that we cannot cover every single one, and we can't be so greedy to include every single one in the assessment. So I think what we can do is just to include what we think is the key learning outcomes that you want to achieve from the course, and the most relevant skill which you think is covered by the course and by the assessment method that you're using.
For us, our rubric in fact doesn't cover more of the generic skills, but the focus is a lot on getting students to work well, train them well for the work world where they need to collaborate, they need to learn to be kind and support each other. So a lot about being responsible, a lot about being a supportive member. In fact, our rubric, the 30% component for the peer evaluation, has the emphasis on being a supportive member. Yeah, and then the other part is really about submitting your work and doing your work dutifully and effectively. Yeah, so I agree with Lillian that it's at the end of the day, it ties back to your ultimate learning outcome, what you want students to go off with from the course. Yeah, and for us, character is definitely one of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Melissa invited us to join the Global Health Ethics course a few years ago, and every year we did a lot of group work. Students have to do peer evaluation for each other, and we also we had some really great groups, but sometimes we had some challenges, students arguing, fighting for minor things, for important things, just very diverse, sometimes could be dramatic. But Melissa, if you don't mind, may I invite you to say something about the peer evaluation in group work, give us some tips on how to handle the challenges we have encountered.
Sure, yeah. So I think I definitely agree that you can tell when a group is cohesive because they tend to evaluate each other pretty much on the highest end. And we also say it's anonymous feedback. It will only be shared with the other instructors if there are problems. And so I think people have generally been pretty honest when there's been a problem. So it's hard to tell if the other part is inflated because they got along so well. Isn't that the point of the group work? That it was such a cohesive group. But when they don't get along well, or one person in particular like doesn't really do their fair share, I think it does come out in the evaluation. Actually, I was sitting here thinking, my question would be, at our university, we're not, as far as I know, we're not allowed to factor in, we're not allowed to have students grade other students. So we can give extra points for good performance, but we're not allowed to use a peer evaluation to reduce a student's grade, despite, you know, the entire group saying that person didn't carry their weight. So I'm sort of, that would be my biggest challenge, is I'm curious to know how to handle that situation. So do you go back to the positive reinforcement part, or what do we do?
Okay, so personally, I'm more for the positive reinforcement version, which we tried last semester. But we did get students saying that, hey, you know, this guy didn't do the work, and you know, you mentioned that you don't tolerate free riders. So what can we do about this person? So it was an easier to handle situation because students, once you actually explain to them that, hey, if you actually put the grades together and if they get rated down, they get a much lower grade if you view the peer evaluation and group project component together. But I think it's a lot easier to handle that kind of cases compared to like what Melissa mentioned. It's a real issue, whereas the one who get rated, usually they don't respond so well. But the good news is also that I think some of them, they know that they won't be rated so well. But really a small handful of students will be very, a small handful of students will be those where they are really, really very unhappy. And then that's when mediation will come in. So the component where earlier on my colleague Lillian mentioned about tutors moderation, that is definitely one area that has to be tagged along with students' rating, because we cannot fully, in that kind of very drastic situation where one person really get rated down, we do have to investigate, and the tutor need to see the students' in-class performance. The tutor will get a very good sense of whether is that child being bullied or not, and step in and try to say that, hey, the tutor needs to override. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we got a
And
question.
I think another thing that we can, I think another thing that we can do is to have some sort of midterm peer evaluation, you know, to identify those free riders earlier, so that we can do something and talk to them about it. Yeah.
It will be better to have peer evaluation as a formative assessment instead of a summative assessment, so that students to encourage each other instead of giving each other some bad final grade without any learning experience. We have a question from the chat box from MR. Is it recommended to do testing of the evaluation tool prior to use for its sensitivity to measure what it intends to measure? In our institution, we just conduct debriefing for each group, and I ask both the group leader and members for the extent of each participation in completing a task. I just do some deductions for those who have lesser participation, and for those who didn't participate, I usually ask why they failed to participate and give remedial activities. So about this question is for Adele and TU, because they're asking about the testing of the evaluation tool before using it.
Okay, when Edma, can I just clarify, when you mentioned about testing of the tool, do you mean the technical aspects or like the testing of the rubric and stuff like that?
Emma, would you like to elaborate?
He might be typing.
Yeah.
Oh, testing the rubrics. Our testing of the rubrics only happened when we run it once, and then after that we see how students respond and we adjust, which is why across the 2 semesters so far, and in fact across the terms, we adjust accordingly. So that's our version of testing. So we change from negative punishment to positive reinforcement, then back to negative punishment again. On that note, actually just wanted to share that, Catherine, your point earlier on about not using peer evaluation as part of the score is a good point. And I think literature did say that it has better effect when it's just used as a formative assessment rather than docking on marks. But yet at the same time, I think there's cultural aspects to how we run the peer evaluation as well, because somehow students who end up they just want those students who didn't contribute for their marks to be docked. Unfortunately, yeah, they somehow they just think that way. Yeah. So it takes a bit to do for that culture shift. Back to Edma's question. Yeah, we test it by running it, and then after that we adjust for the next term or the next semester. And we run a course and it's going to go up to 3,000 plus students. So we really don't have the capacity to talk to students one-on-one to find out. In another institution that I used to teach, if it's the same course, you follow through with the same students throughout, it will be the same few person who constantly get rated. And in that kind of situation, it's a lot easier to manage and talk to them. But for us, with a big cohort, unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to talk to the groups one-on-one, but for groups where the dynamics is really very off, then we manage it. Yeah. And to Lillian's point earlier on, we have a formative component, but somehow even us talking to student mid-sem using the data to try to mediate, right? Somehow it still sort of tear groups apart. When tutors do step in to try to say, hey, try to work harder for the next sem. So what we do is that we keep a lookout. We use the data to help us to keep a lookout, and then we nudge those groups silently without getting them to tell us, what's going on and things like, yeah. So this is what we have been practicing. Yeah.
Thank you. MR typed, I experienced that some students tend to give low scores in their peer evaluation, maybe their point of revenge, but sometimes peer evaluation can be subjective. So let's get back to Lillian's presentation. Have this general skills training throughout, maybe they're on math course, engineering course, any course, if they have some project work, teamwork at the beginning, or you can blend this general skills training in the course. Along the way, train them through different components. So it's my experience, actually. Do I have any other questions, or anybody would like to share some experience? Cool. So I think no matter is involving students in the assessment process, or previously our university also talked about involving students in the course design process. I bet it's useful, it's interesting, but it's also a challenge. How it works, whether it works, it depends on the nature of the course, the nature of the project. So a lot of factors. It's not easy, but that's the exciting part of teaching and learning, I bet. Well, it's so great to have our speakers, wonderful speakers today, and have our the discussion from our participants. But before we end this webinar, may I invite Melissa to give us the closing remarks. Melissa, please.
Thank you. No, I would just like to once again thank our speakers so much for being here. As you saw, there's not just testing of new ideas, but really the research and testing behind to make sure that these are, grounded in evidence. And so I really appreciate hearing about all of these innovative techniques and to challenge us to think about what exactly we are assessing and how best to do that. So thank you once again, and thank you to Kate for being the moderator of this session, and to all of you for participating, for attending. I hope that we'll see you in a future APRU Global Health event again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. Have a wonderful
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
or evening.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good day and good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.